So is it a case then of like body set where if you run on if you do one type of running continuously and your body builds up to that, can you maintain that while also adapting to say running on like muck and running on hills? And can you then be as high performing on both types? Or does your body kind of need to get into that rhythm and into that sort of status of doing one or as opposed to the other?
Yeah, so it'll depend on the type of runner, what goals they have, what they want to achieve. And definitely we have road runners who are also trail runners, who are also like obstacle course runners, like they're just depending on what you want to put your body through, but you need the specific training and you need to, like the body will adapt to anything. You just need to make sure the training is specific enough and offers the variety. And so one thing that runners like to do to become more resilient is say train with different types of shoes. Like they adapt to different types of shoes. One might be a little bit more barefoot, one might have a little bit more support, one might have a higher heel lift, that kind of thing. And if you've adapted to all those shoes, then your body starts to like become more resilient because you're changing up the variety. You're throwing something different at them every time and they're adapting to those. And it'd be similar to someone who is a runner, but then they're also a gym goer, or they also do like say CrossFit, all these like different direction type of movements, different power movements, different like slow, heavy lifting type of things. You're just throwing one thing after another, different elements into the body. And if they adapt and they get stronger, then you become more resilient because you can almost start to throw anything at you and you've adapted to it. So that's an ideal, but it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of like rigorous training. It takes, this methodical kind of process. But because runners are this type A personality, they usually don't have the patience and they're usually a little bit too stubborn, and that's why they end up getting injured.
So if we were going to flip that to the complete other side, if someone that like me doesn't run at all, other than occasionally here and there, wanted to actually get into it, become a runner, what sort of injuries can they expect in the first sort of period, and is there any way that they can mitigate those issues?
Yeah, good question. And new runners are very likely to get injured if they do so in a non-sensible approach. And it makes like the type of injury will depend on the individual. It's usually there's two things that will decide what injury occurs. One is a spike in training, and two would be like, what's your weakest link, you could say. What's your what structure, what joint will have the lowest ability to adapt, and that's usually what will turn up. So if you're doing martial arts and you're spending a lot of time, say in minimalist footwear or even barefoot, your feet are going to be really strong, and so that could be like a kind of like one of your strong points. But you might not be able to adapt to say hard hitting on firm surfaces like running on concrete or something like that, because martial arts are kind of like the softer kind of ground, and so you might develop shin splints. Who knows? It depends what your body, where your weakest link is. However, like I said at the start, you need two things. You need that weakest link, but you also need to overload the body to that weakest point. And no matter where your weakest point is, you won't develop an injury if you start running and you do so very gradually and you allow the body time to adapt, and you don't exceed the capacity. And so that leaves the next question of like, where should I start then? And that's where it becomes a bit of an art and a bit of a science mixed in together, because it takes someone with experience to say, Johnny, I reckon you're really strong because you've got a big history with martial arts. You've done a lot of strength training. I think your body is capable of a lot. So we might actually start with just doing running 1K and then walking for a couple of minutes, and then running 1K and walking for a couple of minutes, and then do that 3 times, see how you feel the next day, and then we'll work our way up from there. Whereas someone else who is, say, a mum or a dad and hasn't ran for 20 years and has been drinking beers and been on the couch watching footy for 3 years, and then wants to get into running because they want to lose weight and they've got this health kick, it's start of the new year and new year, new me, and then they start running, I would say, okay, let's make sure this is super gradual, because you haven't done any strength training, you're not cardiovascularly fit, you don't have that aerobic capacity. I would start maybe jogging for 1 minute and then walking for 5 minutes.
Mhm.
Then start jogging for 1 minute, walking for 5 minutes. And let's just work our way through that process, see how you feel the next day, and then work our way up from there. And that's where the Couch to 5K is an app that people can download. It's super effective for someone who is really deconditioned and really weak and hasn't ran before. And it's just a plan, like it's automatically on your phone. And you do this, like, I think every day or like 5 days a week, something like that. And just tells you when to start walking, when to start jogging, when to start walking, when to start jogging. And eventually, as the weeks go on, you adapt. And the goal is eventually to get you to running 5K nonstop. And so apps like that and plans like that can be really, really effective because you just follow the guidance of that app and you don't have this misguided need to try and run 5Ks off the bat, and then you just end up with Achilles issues or knee pain, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So does nutrition come into it? Is that a factor? Extra protein, extra iron, extra calcium? I assume that does come into it in the injury side.
Yeah, and I think once we're getting more to the top end, similar to like team sports and like elites, the more and more the more intense your workouts get and the higher mileage the runner tends to get, the more you need to start to prioritize recovery. If someone's walking for a minute and then jogging for a minute and doing that on and off for 10 times, nutrition isn't really going to come into it. The body's just going to bounce back pretty quickly. However, if someone's training for a marathon and they've gone to doing like 20K weeks to doing 100K weeks, that's where our body needs to recover. That's where we need to prioritize a lot of recovery. And that's where sleep, stress management, nutrition all come into it. And if you're lacking in nutrition, then you really need to, you're going to be at more risk of injury because the body's just not getting its nutrients in order to recover. And sleep is a big one as well. There's been tons of studies to link poor quality sleep to a future like injury, because the same thing with nutrition. It's your rest and recovery time is when the body starts to adapt. It's when the body starts to de-stress and take on that load that you've put it through the last day. And if your sleep is inadequate, then you haven't fully recovered, and then you go into the next day to try and work pretty hard, and that's when things start breaking down.